Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the last day of talks and workshops of DjangoCon Europe 2021. Uh, so now let's move on to the lightning talks. First up we have Jeffrey, and the talk is using data classes to self-document external APIs. Afterwards we have Michael, which will be talking about machine learning for Django developers. Afterwards Chris, learning open source with Django snippets. Then Sebastian, Redis tasks, yet another tasks queue. And finally, the last one by Anthonius, the climate crisis and its relation to Django. Hope you enjoy.
Heyo, this is a talk on using data classes to help self-document external APIs. How many times have you come across code like this? This is a POST request to an API that accepts parameters like title, body and user ID for creating a blog post. It then returns a response which contains data about the created blog post. We construct a request data dictionary with relevant parameters and return a dictionary with the JSON response. So what are the issues here? The supported request parameters are unknown. In this example we are sending title, body and user ID to this service, but how can we be sure that these are the only arguments that the API can accept? The parameter types are also unknown. How do we know what types we are supposed to send to this API? While in most cases we can infer this, it is still nice to be explicit. As well as that, the response is unknown. In this snippet we have absolutely no idea what data has been returned by the API and therefore the function as well. All we know is that it returns a dictionary. So, why do we care about this? Because we have no way of knowing what the response contains, when somebody comes to this code in the future there is a large barrier of entry before they can work with it. They would have to either test the API or hope that other references to this function provide clarity. We may also find it hard to get the documentation again. Maybe the documentation requires credentials to access and nobody can remember them. Or maybe you're using an older version which has had the documentation removed. Whatever the case, a delay accessing the documentation equals a delay on working with the API. What am I proposing to help deal with these issues? As you may have guessed, it's to replace the usage of dictionaries with data classes to explicitly define our requests and responses. In this example, we can now see that the request data for this API accepts title, body, user ID, and we can send it author if we want to. We also know exactly what type each parameter should be. Any future programmer can see this and understand how to construct a request for this API without needing to find the documentation. We have also defined what the response should look like and what values will be available, which again helps any future programmer to know exactly what will be returned if they call this function without needing to refer to the documentation. There are also some side benefits to this approach. Constructing request and response objects for unit tests is now simpler. Most IDEs will also offer autocomplete when using request and response objects now, and you can use type checkers to help ensure that code that uses the request and response objects are bug-free, whether through static analysis with something similar to MyPy or runtime analysis with something like Pydantic, or both. But what about docstrings? Some of you may have seen the first example and cried out in horror at the lack of a docstring which would have been the appropriate response. The first example could have had a docstring similar to this which provides the missing API data as well. I would still recommend using data classes for the extra self-documentation they provide plus the side benefits previously listed. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll agree that the usage of data classes helps keep your code easier to understand for any future developers. The code shown here is available at this GitHub URL and I'll post these slides in the Slack. Thanks again.
Hi everyone, this is Michael Lukeris. I'm the CTO of Intelia ICT. In this lightning talk, I would explain how to integrate and serve a machine learning model for object detection into Django using TensorFlow and Keras. Our goal is to create a simple web application. First thing first, we need to train our model, which is a really complicated process. For our simple case, we are going to use a pre-trained model for object detection offered by the TensorFlow Hub. Then we create a Django application with a homepage view which displays a single form with only one image field. The viewsPost function retrieves the image, transforms it into an array using NumPy, and finally feeds it to the model. The model detects the objects of the image, draws the appropriate boxes, and finally saves it as a static file. It is a lot of boilerplate code that you can find in my repository. So, the user uploads an image, submits the form, and voila! Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Wedgwood, and I'm here to talk to you about getting started with open source contributions as a entry-level developer with Django snippets. So I've had a great conference. I've been thinking about things, and here are some of my thoughts and observations. So the Django ecosystem needs more open source contributors. We always have, always will. And the other observations I've had in my experience has been learning how to start contributing in open source can be quite daunting, and it can feel like quite a steep hill to climb in the beginning. And often what I've seen, on the mailing list is, there is a desire for people to, once they are converted to Django, they want to get involved, be part of it. And I think, certainly contributing to the main framework is very important, but it's a complex system, isn't it? I mean, it's mature. So the kind of things that are being fixed or changed are, I would say, hard stuff. So I've been thinking about how do we, as a community, take aspiring, beginner, junior devs from aspirational contributors to ultimately productive contributors, thinking about things like channels. I've heard, desire for channels contributions, but even myself, I'm a bit intimidated, and that sounds quite hard. So I'm thinking there needs to be maybe a place for people to start to get comfortable with how open source contributions work. So firstly, why would you want to do open source? Well, I think if you want to become a professional programmer, if you're not currently in work as a professional programmer, I think it's quite hard to learn things that professional programmers need to know. It's not enough just to know Django and to know some JavaScript and think you can just sort of happily walk into a development team and be productive. There's so much that goes on around agile rituals, understanding Git, understanding operating systems, you name it. There's a lot to know and to be comfortable with for you to be a productive professional programmer. So, open source is the best way to learn, because you're going to be working with people in that kind of capacity, and then for prospective employers, they're going to be able to see your work and hire you. The other reasons, your framework needs you. If we don't put back, we run the risk of becoming redundant. And I think, I was certainly inspired by the talk on channels and thinking about WebSockets, and I thought, okay, this is great, but it needs love, and it needs attention, and it's got to come from you. Yes, you. So think about that, and then networking and relationships is an important tool, and it's powerful for your career. So where to start? Django snippets, of course. So Django snippets has been around a while, but needs a lot of love and attention, and I think it could be great again. Not that it's not great now, but it definitely needs some love. So why? I want to think about this concept of beginner friendly and beginner useful. So, there's no denying that we are a very friendly community, but we need a place to come to start. Like, come ask those stupid questions. Come, no question is too stupid. Just come and ask away and learn how to do open source contributions. And there's lots of low hanging fruit with Django snippets, and I can prove it to you. Like, no mistake is too grave. That's my first contribution, and it brought down the site by a week. So, you can't do worse than me. So when tomorrow in the sprints, I'll be in gather.town. Come find me. All are welcome. Very beginner friendly. Come, get started in open source. Thank you.
Hello, I am Antonis. I'm one of about 8 billion people living on the pale blue dot, which may or may not be visible in the picture on the left. And I'm also a Django developer. I help water engineers bring their models to the web. I have written a free book about Django deployment. Now, I have engaged in some climate research, and I have co-authored a few scientific papers. And I am a denier. I've never got any money from an oil company. Now, the mainstream climate change narrative consists of several theses, and I don't need hours to explain why most of them are wrong. But I am going to give you one example. In 2020, for the first time in history, human CO2 emissions fell significantly because of the lockdowns. You can see that in the red line. How did this affect CO2 concentration in the atmosphere? Not at all. So there is now strong evidence that the increase in CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is not anthropogenic. Why has no one told you about it? Because the news people avoid telling you any story that interferes with the mainstream narrative. And I'm going to give you an example. Last February, The Telegraph published this article, which does interfere. But a few hours later, they replaced it with something else. The title of the original story still survives in the URL. But if you follow that URL, it takes you to the second article now. Now, I am one scientist, together with a few others, who claims the evidence for anthropogenic climate change is non-existent. So why should you listen to me? Why not to the majority who claim otherwise? So I'm going to tell you a story about that. 10 years ago, I went to a conference in Florida and I presented my opinion. In one of the conference days, the organizers had organized a trip to the Kennedy Space Center, so I went. And in the bus, I happened to be sitting beside a young lady, so we introduced ourselves and chatted. It turned out that she was a PhD student also working on climate, and unsurprisingly, her work supported the anthropogenic climate change narrative. So I joked, and I said, "Hey, we are enemies." And this is what she replied. "You know something? We are not really enemies, but don't tell this to my supervisor." So, unfortunately, scientists go to where the money is. It's more or less like programmers. If there are lots of green jobs, programmers will go there. And a huge amount of money goes to climate research. What does all this have to do with Django? I don't really see a connection. But since there has been a climate change talk in this Django conference, I thought this would be interesting. Thanks for watching.